The first thing I heard was the sound of boots hitting my gravel driveway. Not one pair, not two, a dozen. I stood inside my ranch house with my coffee still sitting untouched on the kitchen counter, watching through the window as 3 black SUVs rolled onto my property like they owned the place. Their headlights cut through the early morning fog, and for a moment, I honestly thought there had been some kind of emergency. Then I saw the uniforms, police-style uniforms, badges, utility belts, the kind of image designed to make an ordinary person panic. But something was wrong. The vehicles didn't have department markings. The badges looked cheap. And the man standing in front of the group wasn't holding himself like a real officer. He was holding himself like an actor, waiting for applause. I grabbed my phone and started recording. "What's going on here?" I shouted as I stepped onto my porch. The man in front looked up at me and smiled. Not a friendly smile, a confident one. The kind of smile someone wears when they think they already won. "Mr. Daniel Carter," he called out. I didn't answer immediately. Instead, I tightened my grip on my phone. "Who wants to know?" He stepped forward. "I'm here to enforce a property compliance order. You've been notified multiple times. You are refusing to cooperate with the Homeowners Association." I actually laughed. Not because it was funny, because it was unbelievable. "My Homeowners Association," I said. "You're standing on my private ranch. What exactly do you think you're enforcing?" The man looked over his shoulder toward the SUVs. Then he looked back at me. "Final warning. You need to vacate the property." Those words hit me harder than I expected. Vacate my property. The ranch my grandfather bought 40 years ago. The land where I learned how to ride horses, repair fences, and work with my hands. The place where every tree, every fence post, and every dirt path carried a memory. And now some strangers were standing in my driveway pretending they had authority over it. I looked past them toward the entrance of my ranch. That was when I noticed something. They had stopped exactly where I expected them to stop, right before the steel bollards, the heavy-duty barriers I installed after months of harassment from the HOA. They thought they were coming onto my land. They thought intimidation would make me surrender. They didn't realize those steel posts weren't just protecting my property. They were protecting the last line between me and people who believed they could take whatever they wanted. The fake officer raised his voice. "Mr. Carter, this is your final opportunity." I looked at the camera recording everything. Then I looked directly at him. "No," I said quietly. The smile disappeared from his face. "No?" I stepped down from the porch. "No. This is your final opportunity to leave my property before you explain to a real police officer why you're pretending to be one." For the first time that morning, the confidence in their faces changed, and that was when I realized something terrifying. They weren't here to scare me. They were here because they believed they had already found a way to win, but they had no idea what I had discovered the night before. A single document. One piece of paper buried in county records. A piece of evidence that could destroy everything they had built. And as those fake officers stood outside my ranch gate, I knew this fight was no longer about a property dispute. It was about exposing how far some people would go when they thought nobody would challenge them. And I was about to find out exactly how far they were willing to go. My name is Daniel Carter. I'm 52 years old, and for most of my life, I've been the kind of person who would rather fix a broken fence than argue with someone standing on the other side of it. I'm a 4th-generation ranch owner outside Cedar Hollow, Colorado, a small town about an hour away from Denver. My family never had millions of dollars or fancy houses. What we had was land, hard work, and a name people trusted. The ranch wasn't just an investment, it was the place that shaped me. I still remember being 8 years old, sitting on the front steps with my grandfather, Thomas, watching the sunset over the fields while he taught me things you couldn't learn from a book. "Land remembers people, Danny," he used to say. "You take care of it, and it takes care of you." At the time, I thought he was just talking about farming. Years later, I understood. The ranch held every chapter of my life. My first horse, my first job. The day my father taught me how to repair a tractor. The summer I buried my grandfather beneath the old oak tree overlooking the north pasture. After my father passed away, I became the person responsible for keeping everything running. My days were simple: checking fences, maintaining equipment, managing livestock, and making sure the ranch stayed exactly the way my family had built it. I wasn't against progress. I wasn't some person who hated change. But I believed there was a difference between improving something and destroying what made it valuable. That difference became obvious when a new development started appearing around us, a luxury neighborhood called Silver Pines Estates. At first, I didn't pay much attention. The land surrounding my ranch had always changed hands over the years. New houses came in, old farms disappeared, and life moved forward. Then I started noticing the signs. Literally, large wooden signs appeared along the road. Silver Pines Estates. Luxury country living coming soon. The advertisements showed beautiful homes, mountain views, and peaceful rural living. But the pictures were carefully edited. They showed the rolling hills behind my property. They showed the open fields. They showed the same landscape my family had protected for decades. I knew exactly what they were selling, the feeling of being next to a real ranch. But apparently they didn't want the actual ranch owner nearby. The first strange encounter happened on a Tuesday afternoon. I was repairing a section of fence near the eastern boundary when a man in a perfectly pressed shirt walked across the field toward me. "Daniel Carter?" he asked. I wiped my hands on my jeans. "That depends. Who's asking?" He smiled. "Richard Hayes. I represent Silver Pines Community Association." I had heard the name before. "The HOA." I nodded politely. "Okay. What can I do for you?" He looked around the property before answering. "Not at the fence. Not at the animals. At the land. We'd like to discuss your future plans for this property." Something about the way he said it bothered me. Not your ranch. Not your land. Your property. Like it was just a piece of real estate, waiting for the right offer. "I'm not selling," I said. His smile stayed, but his eyes changed. "I think you misunderstand. We're not talking about whether you want to sell today." I looked at him. "We're talking about what happens next." That sentence stayed with me, because at the time, I didn't know it, but that was the first warning. The first moment when I realized Silver Pines wasn't interested in becoming my neighbor. They were interested in becoming my replacement, and I was about to learn that refusing to sell would make me their biggest problem. 3 days after Richard Hayes walked onto my ranch and told me we needed to discuss what happens next, I received my first official letter from Silver Pines Community Association. I opened it expecting some kind of neighborhood proposal. Instead, I found a document filled with accusations: unauthorized commercial activity, unsafe property conditions, violation of community standards. I read it twice because I honestly thought I was missing something. I wasn't part of their HOA. I didn't live in their development. My ranch existed long before Silver Pines Estates was even an idea. I called the number at the bottom of the letter. Richard answered on the second ring. "Daniel," he said immediately. "I was expecting your call." That bothered me more than it should have. "You sent me a violation notice for property rules I never agreed to." A pause, then a calm response. "Everyone has to follow community expectations when they impact surrounding property values." I stood in my office, staring at the paperwork spread across my desk. "Richard, my ranch has been here since before your community existed. Times change, Daniel." "No, contracts change, ownership changes, laws change. But my property line doesn't disappear because someone builds expensive houses next door." His tone became colder. "You're making this harder than it needs to be." I leaned back in my chair. "What exactly am I making harder? You have a valuable opportunity here." There it was again, the same message. "Sell. We made you a fair offer." "I never asked for an offer. You might want to reconsider." I ended the call after that, but the pressure didn't stop. Within 2 weeks, HOA representatives started showing up near my fence line. They took pictures. They walked around with clipboards. They measured things. Every time I approached them, they acted like I was the problem. One afternoon, I found 2 men standing beside my barn. "Can I help you?" I asked. One of them looked up. "We're documenting safety concerns." "You're standing on my property." "We're investigating a complaint." "From who?" They didn't answer. That was when I started installing cameras around the ranch. Not because I wanted a fight, because something in my gut told me one was coming, and I was right. The real escalation happened on a Friday morning. I was feeding the horses when 3 police vehicles arrived at the entrance. At least they looked like police vehicles. A man wearing a sheriff-style uniform stepped out. "Daniel Carter." I walked toward the gate. "Yes?" "We received a report about an active property dispute and refusal to comply with lawful orders." I looked behind him. Richard Hayes was sitting in one of the SUVs. That was when everything clicked. "What lawful order?" I asked. The officer reached into a folder. "This notice requires you to allow access for inspection." I looked at the paper. Something felt wrong. "Who issued this?" He hesitated, just for half a second, but I noticed. "The association has requested enforcement." I stared at him. The association? Richard stepped out of the vehicle. Daniel, don't make this embarrassing. I turned toward him. Embarrassing for who? His expression hardened. For someone who refuses to understand when they've lost. The fake officer moved closer. Sir, you need to cooperate. I looked directly at his badge, then his vehicle, then the camera above my gate. I already knew something wasn't right. This isn't a police action, I said. The man's face changed. You should be careful with accusations. No, I replied. You should be careful pretending to have authority you don't have. For a moment, nobody spoke. The wind moved through the pasture behind me. The horses stood still, and standing there at my own gate, surrounded by people trying to intimidate me, I realized something important. This wasn't a disagreement between neighbors anymore. This was a coordinated attempt to make me afraid. And the worst part, they were confident enough to do it in broad daylight, because they believed nobody would question them. But they were wrong. Because now I was going to find out exactly who was behind it, and why they were willing to go this far to take my ranch. The morning after the fake officers showed up, I did something I should have done weeks earlier. I stopped trying to understand their behavior and started collecting proof. I spent years running a ranch. I understood one simple rule. When something doesn't make sense, you don't argue with it. You investigate it. I called the one person I knew who could help me separate intimidation from reality. Her name was Rebecca Morgan. Rebecca was a property rights attorney based in Denver. I had met her years earlier when she helped my neighbor settle a boundary dispute. She wasn't the type of lawyer who walked into a room trying to impress people. She listened first. Then she attacked the facts. When she arrived at my ranch, she parked her old silver sedan near the barn and stepped out carrying a thick folder. She looked around at the property. Daniel, I've heard about Silver Pines. I crossed my arms. Then you know why I called? She nodded. I know they're aggressive, but I don't know yet if they're stupid. What's the difference? She looked toward the entrance gate. Stupid people make mistakes. Aggressive people sometimes make mistakes because they think they're untouchable. That sentence stuck with me. We spent the next several hours at my kitchen table. Rebecca reviewed every letter, every notice, every email. She read slowly, carefully. Then she looked up. Something is strange. What? She tapped the papers. They're using language that suggests you're already part of their association. I'm not. I know. She flipped through another document. Do you have the original property deed? I do. Survey records? In the office. County filings? Probably somewhere. She smiled slightly. Good. Because whoever sent these letters is assuming you won't look deeper. The next few days became a search through decades of paperwork. Old surveys, tax documents, county maps, property transfers, everything my family had collected over generations. Rebecca also requested records from the county clerk's office. That was when the first cracks started appearing. The official boundary map for Silver Pines was different from the map they were showing potential buyers. A small section of their planned community overlapped with land they didn't own, my land. At first, it seemed like a simple mistake, until Rebecca found the emails. They were buried inside public planning records. Internal communication between Silver Pines developers and county representatives. One message caught our attention. It was from Richard Hayes. The subject line read, Acquisition Timeline Adjustment. Rebecca opened it. I watched her eyes move across the screen, then stop. What? She didn't answer immediately. Daniel, what does it say? She turned the laptop toward me. The email discussed accelerating pressure tactics against surrounding property owners. My stomach tightened. They weren't just trying to buy my ranch. They were planning ways to make staying difficult. The email mentioned complaints, inspections, community pressure, even alternative enforcement methods. I looked at Rebecca. Alternative enforcement methods? She nodded slowly. That phrase concerns me. Then she noticed something else, a name attached to the email thread. Not Richard Hayes, someone higher, the developer himself, a man named Victor Lang. Rebecca leaned back in her chair. Daniel, I think we just found the reason they're so confident. I stared at the screen. What reason? She pointed at the document. They weren't trying to convince you to sell. A long silence filled the kitchen. They were trying to create a record that made it look like you had no choice. That was the moment everything changed. Because suddenly, the fake officers, the violation letters, the pressure, the threats, they weren't random. They were pieces of a plan. And then Rebecca found one more document, a document filed 6 months before Silver Pines even broke ground. A document that proved they knew exactly what they were doing. A document that could completely destroy their entire story. The document Rebecca found was only 4 pages long. 4 pages. That was all it took to expose what Silver Pines had spent months trying to hide. The file was a preliminary development agreement between Silver Pines Holdings and a private investment group. Buried in the middle of the document was a section titled Future Land Consolidation Strategy. I read the words 3 times before they fully sank in. The plan wasn't to build around my ranch. The plan was to absorb it. They had already included my property in their long-term expansion maps. They had already presented investors with a future version of Silver Pines, where my ranch no longer existed. My family's land wasn't viewed as a neighbor. It was viewed as an obstacle. Rebecca sat across from me at the kitchen table while I stared at the document. "They knew," I said quietly. She nodded. "They knew before they ever approached you." I felt a strange mixture of anger and disappointment, not because someone wanted to buy my land. People buy and sell property every day. That wasn't the issue. The issue was that they decided my answer didn't matter. They had built an entire strategy around wearing me down until I gave them what they wanted. Rebecca began building the case. She contacted former Silver Pines employees. She requested additional county records. She reviewed every communication connected to the project, and slowly, more pieces came together. A former project coordinator named Melissa Grant agreed to speak with us. We met at a small coffee shop outside town. She looked nervous the entire time. "I shouldn't even be telling you this," she said. Rebecca leaned forward. "Melissa, you're protected for providing truthful information." Melissa looked down at her coffee. "Victor Lang was obsessed with getting that ranch." "Why?" I asked. She hesitated. "Because buyers kept asking about the open land behind the development. They wanted the views, the space, the feeling of being away from the city." She looked at me. "Your ranch was the reason people were interested." I almost laughed. "They wanted the ranch without the ranch owner." "Exactly." Then she told us something worse. The fake police incident wasn't the first attempt. Silver Pines had previously hired private security contractors to monitor my property. They had created complaints about noise. They had encouraged residents to report my ranch operations. They were trying to create a public image that I was a difficult neighbor. But when they realized I wasn't going to leave quietly, they made a mistake. They escalated, and now they were exposed. Of course, they didn't surrender. People like Victor Lang rarely admit defeat. Instead, they attacked harder. A week after Melissa's statement, a letter arrived at my home. This one wasn't from the HOA. It came from Silver Pines attorneys. They accused me of harassment. They claimed I was damaging their reputation. They demanded that I remove my security cameras. They threatened legal action. It was their final attempt to flip the story, make themselves the victims. Rebecca read the letter and placed it on my desk. "They're scared." I looked at her. "You think?" "Yes." "Because they're sending lawyers?" "No," she said. "Because scared people start making noise." The next morning, Victor Lang appeared on my property again. This time, he came alone. He stood outside the gate looking different, less confident, more frustrated. "Daniel," he called. I walked toward him but stayed behind the steel bollards. "What do you want, Victor?" He looked at the barriers, then at me. "You really want to go down this road?" I stared at him. "This road started when you decided my property belonged in your plans." His jaw tightened. "You don't understand what you're fighting." "No," I replied. "I understand exactly what I'm fighting." He stepped closer. "Everyone has a price." I looked around at the ranch, the fields, the barn, the old oak tree where my grandfather was buried. Then I looked back at him. Some things aren't for sale. For the first time, Victor didn't have an answer. He turned around and walked back to his car. That night, Rebecca called me. Her voice was serious. "Daniel, we're filing." "Against them?" "Yes." "What happens now?" A pause. Then she said the words I had been waiting for. "Now they have to explain themselves in court." I looked out the window toward the entrance of my ranch. The steel bollards stood exactly where they had always stood. Strong, silent, unmoving. But I knew the hardest battle was still ahead, because proving someone lied was one thing. Making them admit it in front of a judge was something else entirely. And Silver Pines was about to fight harder than ever to protect the truth they had created. The courtroom was colder than I expected. Not physically, emotionally. There was something about sitting there, surrounded by polished wood, silent observers, and people wearing expensive suits that made everything feel heavier. For months, Silver Pines had controlled the story. They told people I was stubborn. They told neighbors I was unreasonable. They told investors I was an obstacle. But now, for the first time, They had to answer questions they couldn't control. I sat beside Rebecca Morgan at the plaintiff's table. Across the room sat Victor Lang and Richard Hayes. Victor looked different from the man who once stood at my gate, telling me I would eventually give in. He wasn't smiling. He wasn't confident. He was staring straight ahead, avoiding eye contact. The judge entered the room, and everyone stood. After the formalities, the hearing began. Silver Pines' attorney, Michael Reynolds, stood first. Your Honor, this case is a misunderstanding between a property owner and a neighboring community association. My clients attempted to resolve a disagreement peacefully, but Mr. Carter has resisted every reasonable effort. I felt my jaw tighten. Every reasonable effort. That was their version. Rebecca didn't react. She simply wrote something on her notepad. Then she stood. Your Honor, this case is not about a disagreement. She looked across the courtroom. It is about a coordinated effort to pressure a private citizen into surrendering property rights. The room became quiet. Silver Pine's attorney immediately objected. Speculation. Rebecca remained calm, which is why we have evidence. The judge nodded. Proceed. The first witness was Melissa Grant. The former Silver Pine's coordinator walked to the stand, clearly nervous. After being sworn in, Rebecca began asking questions. Ms. Grant, did Silver Pines Holdings include Mr. Carter's ranch in future development plans? Michael Reynolds stood. Objection. Relevance. The judge looked at Rebecca. Show me relevance. Rebecca picked up a document. This document shows that Silver Pines marketed expansion plans that included property they did not own. The judge reviewed the paper. Overruled. Continue. Melissa answered. Yes. A wave of whispers moved through the courtroom. Rebecca continued. Did company leadership know Mr. Carter had refused to sell? Yes. Did they discuss methods to pressure him? Melissa swallowed. Yes. The courtroom became completely silent. Then came the evidence that changed everything. The email. The one Richard Hayes never expected anyone to find. Rebecca displayed it on the courtroom screen. The words appeared. Alternative enforcement methods may be necessary to accelerate acquisition timeline. Victor's attorney immediately stood. Your Honor, this email lacks context. Rebecca turned. Then let's provide the context. She called the next witness, a county records officer. The officer confirmed that Silver Pines had submitted internal maps showing Daniel's property as future development space before owning it. Then Rebecca played security footage from my ranch. The courtroom watched the fake officers arrive, the fake uniforms, the unmarked vehicles, the way they attempted to intimidate me. I watched Victor's expression change. For the first time, he looked uncomfortable. The judge leaned forward. Mr. Reynolds, are these individuals employees of a law enforcement agency? The attorney paused. No, Your Honor. Then why were they representing themselves in a manner that suggested they were? The attorney looked toward Victor. No answer. Rebecca approached the final piece of evidence, a recorded conversation, Victor's own voice, captured during a meeting with a contractor. If Carter refuses, we make staying there impossible. The courtroom went silent. Even Victor seemed shocked hearing his own words played back. Rebecca turned toward the judge. Your Honor, this was never about community standards. It was never about safety. It was never about violations. She paused. This was about forcing a property owner to surrender land by creating pressure until he broke. Victor leaned toward his attorney, whispering, frustrated. The confident developer who once believed he controlled everything was now watching his entire strategy collapse, piece by piece. But the judge had not delivered a verdict, not yet. The final arguments were complete. The evidence was submitted. Everyone stood waiting. And as I sat there, I realized something. The truth had finally been heard, but I still had to wait for one final decision. A decision that would determine whether my family's ranch stayed mine, or whether powerful people could simply take what they wanted if they pushed hard enough. The judge looked down at the documents in front of him. Then he spoke. I will issue my ruling after reviewing the evidence. The courtroom emptied slowly, and for the first time in months, there was nothing left for me to fight. Only one thing remained, the verdict. The hardest part of the entire battle wasn't standing up to Victor Lang. It wasn't watching fake officers show up at my gate. It wasn't even sitting across from him in court. The hardest part was waiting. For 3 weeks, I lived in a strange kind of silence. The ranch kept moving like it always had. The horses still needed feeding. The fences still needed repairs. The morning sun still came over the hills, but everything felt different. Every day, I checked my phone, expecting the call from Rebecca. Every day I wondered whether the judge had seen the situation the same way we did. Because when you fight someone with more money, more connections and more resources, there is always a small voice in your head asking one question: what if they win anyway? Then, on a Monday morning, my phone rang. It was Rebecca. I answered immediately. Rebecca? There was a pause. Then I heard her smile through the phone. Daniel, we won. I sat down. I didn't say anything, not because I didn't understand, because after months of fighting, those words felt impossible. We won? I repeated. The judge ruled in our favor. I closed my eyes. For the first time in months, I felt like I could finally breathe. The court's decision was clear. Silver Pines Community Association had no authority over my property. The violation notices they sent were declared invalid. The court found evidence of a coordinated effort to pressure me into selling through intimidation and false claims. The individuals involved in the fake police incident were referred for further investigation. And most importantly, the judge protected my property rights. My ranch remained mine, exactly as it had always been. When I arrived home that afternoon, I parked near the same entrance where months earlier those vehicles had lined up to intimidate me. The steel bollards were still there, the same ones Victor had looked at like they were a challenge. I walked over and placed my hand on one of them. They weren't just pieces of metal. They represented something bigger. A reminder that sometimes protecting what matters means standing firm when everyone expects you to surrender. The reaction from the community was immediate. Some neighbors from Silver Pines reached out privately. A few apologized. One older couple stopped by my gate. The husband looked embarrassed. We believed what they told us, he admitted. I nodded. I understand. He looked toward the ranch. They made you sound like the problem. I smiled slightly. That was the plan. Over the next few months, Silver Pines changed dramatically. Victor Lang stepped away from the project after investors lost confidence in his leadership. Richard Hayes resigned from the HOA board. The association was forced to review its policies, and several residents demanded more transparency. The story even caught local media attention. Not because I wanted publicity. I never wanted to be famous. I just wanted to keep my home. Reporters asked me the same question over and over. Why didn't you just sell? The answer was simple. Because selling was never the real issue. I wasn't against moving forward. I wasn't against development. I was against being bullied into giving up something that was mine. A few months later, I sat under the old oak tree where my grandfather was buried. The same place where he once told me that land remembers people. I finally understood what he meant. The ranch wasn't valuable because of the buildings, or the fences, or the acreage. It was valuable because of the people who fought to protect it. And as I watched the sunset over the fields, I realized something else. The steel bollards at my gate stopped people from driving onto my property. But courage was what stopped them from taking it. A year has passed since the day those vehicles rolled onto my ranch, pretending they had the power to take it from me. Sometimes, early in the morning, I still walk down to the entrance gate and look at the steel bollards standing there. They're scratched. They've collected dust. They've been through storms and long winters, but they're still standing, just like me. Life on the ranch eventually returned to normal. The noise faded. The meetings ended. The legal documents were filed away. The people who once tried to intimidate me moved on to other things. But I never forgot what happened, because the lesson wasn't just about a piece of land. It was about understanding your rights, protecting what matters, and refusing to let fear make decisions for you. I learned that sometimes the biggest battles don't start with someone breaking a law openly. They start with small pressures, a letter, a warning, a person telling you that you don't have a choice. And if nobody challenges those moments, they can grow into something much bigger. My grandfather once told me that owning land wasn't just about having a name on a document. It was about responsibility, taking care of what was entrusted to you, standing up when something isn't right. Today, when I look across my ranch, I don't just see fields and fences. I see generations of memories. I see my family. I see every person who believed that doing the right thing still mattered. If you're watching this, and you've ever faced a situation where someone tried to pressure you, intimidate you, or make you feel powerless, remember this: your voice matters, your rights matter. And sometimes, the first step toward protecting what belongs to you is simply refusing to back down. Thank you for staying with me through this story. If you've ever experienced an HOA conflict, property dispute, or a situation where someone tried to push you around, I'd like to hear your story. Share it in the comments. What would you have done if you were in my position? Don't forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications so you never miss another real-life inspired story about property rights, justice, and standing up when it matters most. Because sometimes the strongest thing you can build isn't a fence. It's the courage to defend what you believe in.